Joining us now, former Assistant U.S. Attorney David Weinstein. David, good to have you.
Good evening.
I want to play a little bit more of what the president said today before he left for Argentina. Let's listen.
Even if he was right, it doesn't matter, because I was allowed to do whatever I wanted during the campaign. I was running my business, a lot of different things during the campaign. So very simply, Michael Cohen is lying, and he's trying to get a reduced sentence for things that have nothing to do with me.
Good strategy. What's your response to that?
Cohen is lying about certain things, and one of the things he lied about was who he spoke to, who he contacted during a time when the president was still a candidate, senior campaign officials, others connected to Russia for a specific project. And that's what he's pled guilty to lying about today. What the president says he's lying about are statements that he made after the fact. Those statements don't appear to be false statements. Rather, the investigation and Mueller and special counsel's office thinks those are true statements. He's not lying about that.
But as far as the president is concerned, he said, well, he was working on a project. He's a developer. Don't they have to prove some kind of quid pro quo here, or that the president was involved in some sort of illegal activity?
It's not necessarily a quid pro quo, and it certainly could be information that's related to the manipulation of the election by the Russians. The fact that he's engaged in a business opportunity, and as a private citizen who's a businessman, you can be engaged in that business opportunity. But if you're trading favors in the business opportunity for people to get dirt on your opponent in a campaign, and then you're allowing those people to influence the election, that's what Mueller's looking at. That's where the conspiracy is going to be. That's where the criminal conduct is going to occur.
That hasn't come into focus just quite yet.
No, not quite yet.
Well, what about the notion that he's just making this up? He's trying to get a better deal for himself. He's throwing the president under the bus, you know, to create the appearance that something, you know, that he was lying before so he can get a better deal for himself now.
He sounds like every defense attorney who practices law downtown. Those are the types of questions that are asked of cooperating information, of people who are cooperating. Those are questions you pose to the witness. Those are things that you say to a jury when you're trying to convince a jury that the person they just heard testimony from was lying. It doesn't mean they weren't lying, but they may have been telling the truth about other things as well. It seems like it's rationalization on his part as to what the motivation was for Cohen to come forward. He's come forward today to say, you caught me. I lied to Congress, and I'm going to admit that I did that, and in exchange, I want you to tell the judge I'm cooperating with you.
David, you've seen a lot of plea agreements. Is there anything in this plea agreement that stands out to you?
It's a routine plea agreement. One of the things that does stand out here is that they've agreed that they're going to put both of these cases together in front of the first judge who accepted Cohen's plea back in August. That's why he's going to be sentenced later this month. And all the considerations for his cooperation in that case with the U.S. Attorney for Southern District of New York, as well as what he's doing with Mueller and the Special Counsel's Office, all of that's going to be put together to the judge who's going to sentence him on both of these cases.
What do today's developments tell you about the trajectory of the Special Counsel's investigation?
He's building a house. He's an architect. He's taking bricks, he's putting them in place, and he's building a structure. When he's done with the structure, he'll open the doors and he'll put the people inside who he believes he has enough information to proceed against. One of these people might be someone we haven't even heard mentioned yet. There are others who are still out there. He's putting his case together and utilizing the resources he has to build that case. This is an individual today who may help to contribute to why it was that Manafort is believed to have not been telling the truth. They mention a senior campaign official in the information filed today against Cohen. Was that senior official Manafort? If it was, maybe that's part of the good faith basis to believe he's not telling the truth.
All right, we'll see what the next development is. David Weinstein, thank you very much
for
joining us.